Hello everybody and welcome back to LRN and my reaction to the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. It's all over, the season's over, I can't believe we are here already. Quite a few bits that have gone on in this race. I wouldn't say it's a classic, but certainly some big moments with, of course, I mean, Verstappen was off at the front. He did a fantastic drive. I can't take it away from him. It was a fantastic performance by Verstappen. The first thing he said when he's on the microphone at the end of the race is, it was all about tyres, basically keeping life in the tyres. And that's never conducive of an exciting Grand Prix, at least not for the race win. And I think we kind of knew from very early on in the race that we weren't going to have a big fight for first, unless, of course, we had a safety car or an incident. But it seemed pretty clear from the beginning Verstappen was going to go on and win that race, and he did. But, of course, the story was about second place, and I think this is where the excitement comes in. We knew it was Perez versus Leclerc for second. Whoever finished in second place was going to secure second place in the Drivers' Championship. Red Bull hunting their first 1-2 in the World Championship as well. It was a massive thing for Red Bull to get a 1-2 in the Constructors' Championship, sorry, in the Drivers' Championship, have both their drivers in the top two places. But Leclerc, of course, he was the one to stop it. He was the one to finish second, but I think what might be missed is that the time lost behind Lewis Hamilton by Perez, when Hamilton, of course, made sure he let Perez go ahead of him so that he got the DRS detection into the second DRS zone and then got back past Perez. The time lost by Perez to Lewis Hamilton during that period there where Hamilton got back past him, and then the following lap where he's had to then follow Hamilton until he got a shot into the second DRS zone, was enough that he basically lost a lap where he would have been, absolutely flying. He would have made up the time to Leclerc, and it would have seen Perez get into the DRS detection zone for the final lap, if not a lap earlier, and therefore really probably quite easily, given the tyre strategy that Perez was on versus Leclerc, we would have seen Perez come second, and we would have seen Red Bull get that 1-2. So from Hamilton's perspective, it's sweet revenge, because of course it was Perez who cost Hamilton so dearly the season before with the fighting like a lion for Verstappen that of course wasn't necessarily repaid this season by Verstappen. But anyway, Hamilton then getting revenge on Perez for what Perez did to him a year before. And, fair play to him. Of course, his race didn't end as you'd like. He obviously ended with a DNF, with a hydraulic issue. But what he did in the race, he had an impact. He was never in the title fight. He was never really in the battle for the positions in the Drivers' Championship that he would have liked to have been fighting for. But he ended up hitting the fatal blow to Red Bull that has cost them a 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship, and Perez his second place. And to be fair, I think that's probably just. I don't think Perez has been deserving of second place in the Drivers' Championship this season. I don't think he's driven very well, given just how good that Red Bull has been this season. I don't think he's lived up to how good that car is, and I think that Leclerc getting second place is probably just and probably fair on balance, given the performance of the two drivers. Perez having the better car but not making the most of it. Leclerc, yes, he's had his incidents and he probably could have done better in that Ferrari, but given that the Ferrari over the course of the season was by far the second of those two cars, for him to come home and get second place, I think it's an earned achievement by Leclerc, and massive congratulations to Leclerc for getting second place in the championship by that solitary point. So it did go down to the wire. We did have something go down to the wire, and we did have other battles today, so I think we've, of course, got other key points that have been settled today in Abu Dhabi. So, of course, we knew that the Constructors and the Drivers' Championships have been sealed for a while. We did have sort of a really loose chance that McLaren could overhaul Alpine for fourth in the Constructors. That, of course, didn't happen. They would have needed a huge points haul today to overhaul the Alpine. So Alpine, of course, have now confirmed that they are finishing fourth and essentially best of the rest behind the big three teams. So huge. That's a great performance by Alpine this season. I think, of course, they did struggle at the beginning of the season, but came really strong. Norris, a fantastic drive today. Another day where he's been sort of just in that absolute nowhere land of 7th place. He's nowhere near the cars in front, and the cars behind are nowhere near him. And it just goes to show how good he is. And I think you give him the car that can compete. He was the first one in the last couple of days to say, McLaren aren't where they should be right now. We've had Zach Brown talk about the fact that they cannot compete until their new wind tunnel's in place, and that is happening and will be in place in the next couple of seasons. So they should begin to make those strides forward. But Norris, for now, and probably next season as well, will be left in that sort of limbo land, stuck between not being good enough to be with fighting the guys at the front, but too good to be stuck in the battles with the guys behind. So definitely best of the rest, and a fantastic performance across the season from Lando Norris again. And I really look forward to the day that we can see Lando in a title challenging car. Of course, as well, we saw Alfa Romeo beating Aston Martin in the Constructors' Championship on equal points, but basically by getting the best result. So they beat Aston Martin's best result of the season, with Alfa's best result being a 5th place at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. So congratulations to Alfa for seeing out that victory. They kind of had a terrible day at the office today with with Aston Martin having a better day of it. But over the course of the season, Alfa Romeo getting the victory there. And to be fair, that does lean into Aston Martin getting more time in their wind tunnel, more time to be able to develop their car. And given that I think Aston have overtaken Alfa this season already, that's a really good boost for Aston Martin. Alonso, of course, going to the team. It'll be really, I think he's going to want to be fighting Alpine. You can Alonso cannot wait to get out of that Alpine outfit, get away from Esteban Ocon, and be leading, officially leading the Aston Martin team. I think he'll get the rub of the green. He'll get the ideal strategies. He'll be really the number one driver in every sense of the word when he goes to Aston Martin, despite of course Stroll's relationship there. So I think he's going to be excited to go there. I think there's a lot of positive signs from the Aston Martin team at the moment. For Alonso's sake, I hope they can get the car right for next season so that Alonso can be competing with the Alpines, and I can't wait to see him wheel to wheel fighting with Ocon. I think that would be fantastic. So I do hope that happens in different cars and see how that plays out next year. But as I say, for Alfa's perspective, congratulations for beating Aston Martin in the end in the Constructors. But overall, I actually think it's beneficial for Aston Martin. They, of course, don't really need the prize money. I think, they're probably the more wealthy of the teams anyway. So the fact that now they get more time to develop their car for next year and the year after, I think that benefits Aston Martin, surely. And of course, that we had other incidents in the race. We, of course, had one thing I think is confusing for me. You may recall Stroll pushing off Yuki Tsunoda, and then very quickly he realised, of course, he was going to be given a 5-second penalty, or he was going to be advised to give the place back. So they quickly got him out of the way and let Tsunoda go through, which was in great contrast to what we saw earlier in the Grand Prix with Hamilton, where Hamilton, of course, got nudged off. I wouldn't say nudged off, to be fair. I think Sainz made a pretty legal move. Hamilton went over the curb, and there was that conversation that was there damage to the car? I think the pace at the end of the race from Hamilton suggests if there was damage, it was minuscule, but there was something going on, because the pace definitely affected Hamilton. But when he joined back in, it seemed pretty clear that Hamilton was going to have to give that position back to Carlos Sainz, but they just let it go and go and go. And I think obviously the stewards were investigating whether or not Sainz had forced him off. That was decided that he hadn't, and then they had another investigation to decide whether or not Hamilton had gained a lasting advantage and would need to give the position back. And by this point, he was seconds down the road, and of course lost a heap of time because he was right on the back of Leclerc. He had to drop back behind Sainz and then re-overtake, and then of course he ended up losing positions to Sainz and Leclerc. So I just think in those circumstances, if the team are not sure, just get them out of the way, let the guy through and overtake them. Lewis clearly had the pace to overtake the Ferraris in race pace once the tyres were up to temperature. The Mercedes looked quick, and I think all teams need to learn from this. If you are in any doubt, or if you think there's more than a 50% chance you're going to be told to give back the position you've gained, just do it. Just get out the way. Don't leave it to the stewards. Don't let them, reach a position where they've got to be ruling on whether or not you do, because it will cost you more time in the long run. Just get out the way. Let them back past, get them on the next lap, get them on the next DRS zone, whatever it might be. because it's not worth it. And I am looking forward to two things. I think one, the DRS zones need talking about. So I do think that, we saw it today. Some tracks it's worse than others, but today definitely there were lots of overtakes, but it wasn't really exciting. We did have some exciting overtakes, and of course we had the slow burn for second place and how that was going to play out. But in the midfield, we did have a lot of overtakes, but it wasn't really exciting. It wasn't a real wheel-to-wheel action. It was very much just DRS zone, get them halfway down the straight overtakes. There was no diving into the braking zone, and I don't think that the changes made to the Abu Dhabi layout last year have helped that. I think the fact that, of course, you've got that long left-hander off of the second DRS zone, it kind of doesn't lend itself to lunging into the braking zone, and that was kind of the only real place to do it in previous years. Of course, you had the first zone, but as we saw, it wasn't beneficial really to be ahead at the end of the first DRS zone. So you follow them, you get right up behind them, but you let them lead and then you make the overtake. So the actual braking zone where you would see those moves, I think first of all, again, the DRS zone's too long. So those overtakes, if you were to overtake, they're already made. You don't need to dive into the braking zone because the DRS was too powerful anyway. And then into the second zone, it's the same. You don't have a braking zone anymore. So you're already past them, probably, 3/4 of the way down that straight. And then you just make the move into the left-hander and they can't really come back at you. So I do think there needs to be lessons learned there. Whether that be around track layouts or whether that be around shortening the DRS zones, I do think something needs to be done because we want to see wheel-to-wheel action. And I think we can look back now. We can start to review the season, and we'll do another video where we do a full review of the season and what our takeaways are and what the learnings are and what we want to see change moving forward. But as an overall piece, I think we can see that the change to regulations overall, I think, has been positive. I think we've learned a lot this year. I think, of course, at the front of the grid, it hasn't been as good as we'd hoped. We've ended up seeing we've had regulations come in to prevent the dominance that we saw from Mercedes, and we've just had dominance from the most dominant season ever by Red Bull and Max Verstappen. So that hasn't worked. But then you look at the midfield fights, you look that we had, Alpha and Aston finish on equal points. You look at the fact that we had Alpine and McLaren going to the end of the season. We had the fight for second between Leclerc and Perez go to the end of the season. There were gains. There were good things that came of it in the end. And some of the on-track, action that we've seen this year has been absolutely brilliant. Certainly, I think better than what we've seen in previous years. So I do think the regulations absolutely have taken the sport a step forward. I just think there's more to be done to bring that grid closer together and get more wheel-to-wheel action and, say, tweaking things like how big the DRS zones are when we activate the DRS zones. So talk about reducing it to lap 2 instead of lap 3. Things like this would be good. We do want to see maybe more tweaks so that, again, cars can follow each other even closer, because we saw moaning today about, tyres going off, and basically Perez was 2 and a bit seconds behind Verstappen, but still complaining that, he couldn't go any quicker because he was in the dirty air of Verstappen in front. We kind of didn't want that anymore. One of the main reasons for these regulation changes is that these cars would be able to follow much closer to the cars in front. And I do think that with the upgrades that have been brought, teams are finding ways around the regulations that are adapting them a bit further away from what we wanted to see and closer to maybe what was in the previous regs. And I don't want to see that. I want to see a maintained updating of these regulations to keep the cars fighting closer together and get that real wheel-to-wheel overtaking action that we saw in the sprint race and in the race in Brazil. I think Brazil was a perfect example of the kind of racing we want to see, and that, of course, was only in the one race previous. So it's definitely there. The cars can definitely still do it, but we want to see that more. We want to see it happening in most Grand Prix, not some Grand Prix. So, as I say, things can always improve. Hopefully, the FIA and Formula One can take some learnings away, make changes moving forward that bring the pack closer together. But I think overall, this season has been a success and a big step forward in terms of the action we see during the race. I just don't want to have these seasons where someone is so far out in front. I hoped we were past that, but of course, it's not just carried on. It's been worse. As I say, not because of who's won it, because of the fact that they are so far dominant. As I say, Verstappen having a more dominant season than any of Lewis's title wins. So it is, yeah, it's difficult. We don't want to see that. As say, whether it's Verstappen that wins, Hamilton, or any driver on the grid, I don't care. I just want to see those battles for the championships, drivers and constructors, go down to the end of the season, be exciting, be competitive, and not have one driver way out in front. We want to see wheel-to-wheel action all year long at the very front of the grid, like we see in the midfield with those battles between the middle cars. Like, I want to see a season-long battle like the one we had just nearly between Alpine and McLaren. I know it ended really in Brazil, but at least it got to the penultimate race of the season. We want to see that at the front as well, and I think that everyone can kind of agree, no matter who you support and who you want to end up winning that battle, having the battle would be better than just having, like Verstappen has done. And it's no shame on him. He's been absolutely phenomenal for so much of this season. You can't argue with it. But I just don't want him to be able to do that. I want there to be him stuck in battles, wheel-to-wheel action with the likes of Hamilton and Leclerc and Sainz and Russell. And others as well, if other teams can catch up to the front. But we haven't had it. And we can, of course, hope for it in future seasons. And, of course, finally, Sebastian Vettel, thank you for everything that you've done. Another brilliant Grand Prix, and, of course, ruined by strategy today. Not the day you would have hoped for, but he did, of course, end up getting that championship point, but it wasn't enough for them to overtake Alfa Romeo. And you do think if they got the strategy right with Seb, maybe they could have overhauled. Maybe he could have got an extra point today, but it wasn't to be. And nothing against Vettel. I think he drove another fantastic race. It wasn't as good as previous races, but ever since he's announced his retirement, he's been phenomenal. And maybe he's kind of realised that maybe he was putting too much pressure on himself, especially in his years at Ferrari. We saw him struggle. And I do think maybe that pure pressure from Ferrari for him to succeed did weigh heavily on his shoulders. And we've seen in the last few races at Aston Martin, when he's got the shackles off, just how good he can be. And some of the old Seb Vettel, that if he was in a really quick car that was capable of fighting at the front, he would have been. I think, this is some of the best that we've seen Vettel in years in these last few races. And I am sad to see him go. I think he brings a lot to the sport for many, many reasons. And hopefully, honestly, do not be surprised to see Sebastian Vettel back in Formula One in a few years. I think there's a real chance that Audi will push hard to have Seb Vettel join them as their driver when they come back into Formula One, regardless of who his teammate is. I did talk in another video around, that prospect of maybe having a Schumacher-Vettel team up in the future at Audi. I think that could be a really good something everyone will be excited for. We know what that relationship is between Vettel and Schumacher, so having them as teammates would be really good. And Audi love German drivers in their team, so it'd be a pure German team for Audi as well. So maybe we'll get that in the future, but otherwise, enjoy your retirement, Seb. Enjoy being with your family and have a good few years out of the sport, because you have definitely deserved some time off. So hopefully he'll go and enjoy his retirement, but he may get that itch back, and if he does, don't be surprised to see him back at Audi. But that's my main reaction to the Abu Dhabi GP, the final race of the season. I can't believe it's come and gone already. If you are new around here, please make sure to subscribe on the bottom right hand side. It really helps out the channel. And hit a like on the video if you did enjoy it. And hit a like on the video for Sebastian Vettel. He's definitely earned it for everything he's given us in the past seasons he's been in the sport. And what a brilliant career he has had. And hit a like on the video if you enjoyed the Abu Dhabi GP. Let me know all your thoughts on the Grand Prix in the comments below. Driver of the day is, I think, a difficult one today, but I will give it to Charles Leclerc for seeing out second place in the Drivers' Championship. I think that's a huge result for Charles Leclerc. Of course, Verstappen as well with a phenomenal drive, but it does get boring giving it to Verstappen. So I'm going to give it to Charles Leclerc today. I think he's done a brilliant job, and he's had a great result that's given him, I think, a good confidence boost going into the next season. So hopefully he can keep that up. But otherwise, that's been my reaction to the Abu Dhabi GP. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And I look forward to next season starting. We'll continue having content over the winter break, reacting to all news that comes out before and going into next season. So make sure you subscribe to be notified of any uploads on the channel, and make sure to hit a like on the video. Otherwise, just going to thank you so much for watching today. Hope you have a great day. Goodbye.